Hello, everyone. As you get logged in, you will see a webinar or a poll pop up on your screen. If you could take a minute to fill that out, that'd be great. You can also drop into the chat where you're calling in from today. And while we wait for everyone to join us, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Madison Burnett. I'm a BCBA and I lead our professional development program, and I'll be supporting throughout today's webinar. In addition to that role, I work alongside other BCBAs on our clinician-led recruitment team, and I support in the effort of recruiting quality professionals to join our team. If you are interested in joining us, please indicate so in the post-webinar survey at the end, or you can email careers@manhattanpsychologygroup.com. All right, I see that we do have quite a few returning attendees, so welcome, and welcome to everyone who has not joined us before. We're thrilled to have everyone. All right, on the next slide, you will see a little bit about Manhattan Psychology Group. We were established in 2011, and we've continued to grow our team consisting of skilled adult and child psychologists, neuropsychologists, behavior analysts, special educators, and licensed social workers. As a team, we're committed to wraparound care, which includes our wide range of services from mental health and testing to ABA and educational services. This holistic approach allows us to address various needs and challenges with compassion and care, and we provide services to our clients out of our Upper West Side and Long Island City offices, in home, school, and clinic-based settings, as well as through telehealth. Our team is committed to serving individuals, couples, and families of all ages and in diverse settings. Our vision at MPG is to create a future where individuals and their families feel supported, connected, and empowered, and our mission is to provide multidisciplinary, integrated support for individuals and their families who experience mental health, behavioral, and educational challenges. Now for some housekeeping information on CEUs. For those seeking CEUs for this presentation, you will need to attend it in its entirety. So that means there is a minimum of 50 minutes in order to receive the link for the post-webinar survey. We will be sending an email with that link for all those who do meet that minimum requirement following the presentation. As of January 1st, there is a $2.50 fee to obtain a CEU certificate, but this webinar is still free to attend. Any polls during this webinar is not required, but they are encouraged. We'll be leaving the chat open, but please post any questions you have in the Q&A so we can make sure that they are seen. And now I would love to introduce our presenter. Kristin Fayad is a licensed board certified behavior analyst with extensive experience providing ABA services across home, school, and telehealth settings. She specializes in developing and implementing evidence-based interventions that promote communication, social, academic, and adaptive skills for learners of all abilities. Kristin also has expertise in parent and teacher training, classroom management, and supporting both neurotypical and neurodiverse students. In addition to her clinical work, she provides international supervision and contributes to the dissemination of ABA practices in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And now, without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Kristin.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for introducing me, and I'm so excited to get to speak with you all about the good behavior game. I chose this topic because it is one that I use often with learners, and I've used it in various settings, and I'll talk more about that. But some objectives for today's webinar. I want you all to understand what the good behavior game is and why it's effective, how to set it up and implement it for your own use, either individualized with individual learners or with groups of learners, and I'll talk more about that. I'm going to apply it to the core principles of ABA, and I will bring in some real examples from my own work. And I'll also talk about how we can take data and track progress with this game, and just some maintenance and carryover, how this can generalize to other settings, such as in the home with families. And what is a good behavior game? It is a strategy that is evidence-based, backed up by over 50 years of research. It is a motivational strategy, and it also utilizes schedules of reinforcement. So with all of this, these are a lot of things that we tend to do, but it's presented in its own way and it has its own visual. And I want to present that to you guys and see, maybe this is something that you would like to implement with your learners. So one of the key questions that I like to ask my learners when I'm using this game is asking them and motivating them with the EO of like, who's going to win? Or, is the teacher going to win, or are you going to win? Or, is it the good guys or the bad guys? And I'll talk more about that when we get to those slides. Just to give you a little spoiler. So I want to know from you guys, when you signed up for this webinar, are you interested in implementing a good behavior game with one learner, with a small group, or with a full classroom? I'm going to talk about all three, and I wanted to know, what's most interesting to you. I see here there's about 50% that want to implement this with one learner, about 25% for small group and classroom, which is great. It's good. I'm gonna make sure this applies to everybody who's attending today. Good to know. Very cool. So I did some research on the good behavior game just to know and to share with you where this all started. But like I said, there's over 50 years of research. And overall, games have been successful with motivating and reinforcing learners and increasing positive behaviors, right? Barish et al. In 1969 applied the good behavior game with fourth graders who often called out, left their seats, and typical concerns that teachers tend to have with mainstream classrooms, with special ed classrooms, and the like. So this really all started as a solution to classroom management and for teachers to use. And a lot of research has been done, and it is based on principles of ABA, principles of behavior. And I'm going to share with you how to adapt this strategy for an individual learner, because the original research is designed for classroom settings, which is great. We can also use this with individual learners too, and we have one-on-one sessions. So in the Barish et al. And lots of other articles that if you Google and you look up the good behavior game, you're going to find a lot of research done in classroom settings. Typically, a classroom is divided in two teams. So you have 50% of the class on team A and team B, and you make a fun name. The teams select a name, and they work together to win. The team with the fewest disruptive behaviors earn a highly preferred activity. And so they either get points or checks for good behavior or the absence of bad behavior, right? Negative behavior may be defined as calling out or getting out of seat during work time. And so this in this article, they created a competition between groups of learners. It's also been replicated many times and has shown to decrease maladaptive behavior and increase classroom behavior. So let's get more into that. I'm going to share with you my personal experience applying this to an individual learner or applying this to a small group. Okay, so in the research you're going to see, and if you do some research on the good behavior game, you're going to see a lot of the articles talk about points and then having like something like a T chart where you mark points for students who do that target positive behavior, such as raising their hand, right? They'll get a point. Or for a period of time where a negative behavior did not occur, the absence of a target behavior. So no getting out of seat happened. All the people on this team worked together and they get a point. So you could do it as a point system, but I want to show you how in my practice, when I was studying and I was doing my master's program at Columbia University, a lot of us had adapted it and it made it actually a board game. So essentially, it's still a good behavior game. We're just changing the format of it to make it look like a board game. And this board game can be posted on a wall. It can be on a clipboard with that individual learner. And these are just different examples of ones that I've actually used. So I had learners who love SpongeBob SquarePants. I had learners who loved farm animals. And I can't remember why it was this game board that I chose with mountains and water, but there must have been some reason why I chose it. And then just a generic game board that I found on a website online. So these are just different ways that you can visually present the game board. There are, on the SpongeBob one, I don't have the image with the Velcro going across the pathway, but in the middle one you do see two pathways, and that was because one pathway was for the adults or for the teacher or for the therapist, and the other pathway is for the learner. So the way we did it was we did the student or the learner versus the adults or versus the bad guys, we might call it. And so we kind of used the question like, who's going to win, the bad guys, or are you going to win? And we use that as an EO, like, I wonder who's going to win this time. And so that every interval of time was an opportunity to win and to move up. I didn't really, in my personal experience, haven't needed to use any punishment procedure by like moving a character back a space, going back, moving a space backward. Just the consequence of not moving up and the adults moving up in the occurrence of a maladaptive behavior was, I guess, a form of a positive punishment procedure or an extinction on that behavior, because instead of moving up, say the student got out of their seat when they weren't supposed to without permission, the bad guy or the villain would move up instead of them. So I will get more into that because I feel like I'm getting ahead and there are slides on this. But you'll notice that there's a dual pathway, there's a visual appeal, and then there's a finish line. So whoever makes it to the finish line, whoever wins the game is going to get the reinforcer. And the team that doesn't make it to the end will not get the reinforcer. And we'll observe and learn through observation who actually wins gets that reinforcer. So the team or the individual who doesn't win will be left out of that reinforcer as a consequence. So it does create some competition and an EO to win. Now, you're making the board game itself. You're going to choose your material. You could, so logistically, you either need a poster or a foam board. I've also used a laminated board game to make it small and compact. Depends on who your audience is. The dual pathway, you would create either somewhere between 10 and 20 spaces with 2 tracks. You could use 1 track too, but I kind of like the 2 because one track is for the learner, 1 track is for the villain or for the adults team. You always want to egg on the learner and say, you could do it. I think you're going to win this time. Don't let that villain win. Don't let the bad guys win. And always encouraging them that they can do it and they can win. Then there's also a finish point so that it's clear when the game has ended, and immediately after the learner has won and immediately after the player has won, that's when the reinforcer should be implemented. So that immediate reinforcement should be delivered, just like moving up on the game board should be immediate too. So if we're implementing a good behavior game, we don't want to 10 minutes later say, oh, remember when you did that? I'm going to move you up 2 spots because you used an indoor voice 2 times already today. And we don't want to give delayed reinforcement. We really want to use this in the moment. So whatever it is, whatever target behavior you choose is something that you need to reinforce in the moment with that game board. And even if it requires a little bit of an interruption of what they're doing or they're working so nicely, but you want to get in there and reinforce that behavior, you want to do that in the moment and not later and say like, oh, you did that, during math and I want to move you up a space because of that. It's really important for immediate contingent reinforcement. Different ways that you can present it. Like I said, you can use a racetrack, you can use different character themes. I've done a Captain Underpants game board with my special ed class, and that was really fun because everyone thought that was so hilarious. I painted a big poster with Captain Underpants flying across the page, and the game board was from his feet all the way to his hands, where he was like stretched out and flying across the page. So that was super engaging. There's different themes. I did a Chicka Chicka Boom Boom one for preschool students, climbing up the tree. But all in all, the design and the theme isn't as important as the utilization and the effectiveness of the strategy itself. So I just wanted to be clear. You don't have to be a painter or an artist to make a game board. You can print one simply and use that as well. Okay, so personal story. So like I said, I'm going to talk about how to apply this with an individual learner, how to apply this with a small group, and you could also apply this with a full classroom. So let's say that I have a goal and it's the first day of school or I have a new learner. And my goal is that this student can transition between activities within 30 seconds. Right now, I took baseline and my class is taking 3.5 minutes. And I want to decrease that to 30 seconds because I need to decrease the latency to lining up or the latency to putting away material or getting the next set of material to 30 seconds so that we have more instructional time. So if my baseline is 3.5 minutes and my class is taking a really long time, there's maladaptive behavior, there's other behaviors because it's taking 3.5 minutes, kids are getting in little fights or dropping things or getting upset, and it leaves room for other maladaptive behavior, right? So the goal is decrease transition time. Transition time, the way I defined it was putting away the material, getting material needed for the next lesson or for the next activity. It could be something like if you're applying this with an individual learner, putting away the puzzle and getting the next toy on the activity list, right? Sometimes we make those activity schedules where learners are doing a puzzle and then they're going to go get their flashcards and then they're going to watch a video. So we can have them transition from activity to activity on their activity schedule. Or like I'm talking about here, these were just following teacher instructions in the classroom when the teacher said, put away everything that's on your desk and get out one pencil. That should take no more than 30 seconds. Or everybody stand up and line up. That should take 30 seconds too. So that was the goal. Oh, here's the baseline. It was above 5 minutes. Sorry, I said 3.5, but it was above 5 minutes. And this was I used this with a fifth grade special education classroom. We had 5 or 6 students, depending on the day. And I did this to increase instructional time and decrease chaos, for lack of a behavioral term. Decrease chaos, increase instructional time, and decrease the latency to follow instructions and the amount of verbal prompting that I had to do. And so in order to do this, I set students up for success. I allowed the first day or two just to practice my expectation and practice and show them the effect of winning. So I would set the timer and have them beat their time. So if they were at 5 minutes, I said, I want you to beat your time. And as soon as they got 4 minutes and 32 seconds, and I said, you beat your time, you won up on the game board, great job. And we did some practice trials and just purposely increasing opportunities to respond and doing kind of like a DTT with the full class, where I gave them more opportunities to practice and see the effects of this game. So my idea was, let's condition this game board as a positive strategy. I want them to win the first round. I'm going to have them beat their time. So if the first time was 5 minutes and 5 seconds, I told them, you got to beat your score, and then you're going to move up the game board. And as they beat their score during different transitions that I purposely put in place, they won during that session, and we got a reinforcer. Sometimes it was recess, sometimes it was a free period where they could draw or sit on the carpet, or I might put on a video, things like that. But after winning the 10 or 20 spots on the game board, they would then get the reward as a class, the reinforcer as a class. So so that was kind of like how I conditioned the game board to be meaningful and to be motivating for them. Once we were at about a 1 or 2 minute latency to follow the instruction, then I would then systematically decrease and change the criterion until it was 30 seconds. So in the beginning, it might have been just 2 minutes. And then week number 2, it was 1 minute. And week number 3, we were at 30 seconds. And so that was utilizing a change in criterion design. If you guys have questions, could you like jot them down, and I'll have time at the end to chit chat and answer questions. I'd love to help you implement this. with your own students. So if you have any questions about what I'm talking about or if something's not clear, please jot it down and I'm happy to answer them at the end. So like I said, we practice lineup. We did it several times in a row. Practice cleanup, practicing that several times in a row on the first day, and also transitioning from recess. And these were all expectations that they were aware of that tied into the game board. So after we had that practice day, we started implementing it across the day. So they knew that every time I gave an instruction to do something that required them to transition, put something away, to line up, to listen, their latency to respond decreased because it was tied into that board game, and the motivation to win that game was pretty high. I'll give you a quick little story that was really cute. I had one learner who emitted a lot of vocal stereotypy and maybe sometimes the competing reinforcer of winning and the vocal stereotypy was so competitive that he didn't always hear the instruction. So as the learners, the other students in the class realized that he was the last one to line up or the last one to respond to the instruction, they made it a point to get him in line first and then line up instead of lining up and just leaving him behind. So they quickly learned that they had to work together and helped one another win together. So we call that a pure yoked contingency, right? Where the behavior of all students impact the result, impact the consequence. So if they all want reinforcement, then they all have to engage in this target behavior. And I made it clear to them, and I, it was a conversation that we had, if one student is not listening, what do you guys think you could do so that everybody can win? You guys can still win. What do you think? And one student came up with the idea, help that student. Yeah, I said, yeah, you should definitely help your friends. You need to help your friends, and everybody wins when you help one another. So just having like a little conversation with this class really helped in creating that positive environment instead of that hostile, like competitive environment. Of course, with this, because I only had 5 students, I could not split the class into 2. It would just be, I felt like it was better to make them all one team and they would be versus me. So if we look at this, let me see if I have this game board. I can show you the game, a picture. So if they took more time to line up, then instead of them moving up, I would move up. The bad guy or the teachers would move up. So in the absence of target behavior, in the absence of the positive behavior, the other team moves up. So that was the consequence. If you're using a point system, then it would just mean that the other team gets the point, right? So you can either use a game board, game board, or you can use a point system, but either way, it's the other team that gets the point. Okay. I wanted to talk about this evidence-based strategy, and it's called rules, praise, and ignoring. And it's not necessarily tied to the game board, the good behavior game, but it uses the same principles. And I think that this graph really demonstrates it well and shows what components are at play, what components are effective. So if we look at baseline and there are no rules, there are no strategies for praise, and there is also no ignoring, maybe a lot of responding to negative behavior, that would be baseline. So we have high rates of behavior here. And when you implemented, or when the teacher or the therapist implemented only rules, we see this the percentage of intervals with inappropriate behavior, right? So we have students C and F in baseline, C and F with rules. And look at this. Do the rules themselves impact or affect behavior? What do you see here? Do implementing rules, affect the learner's behavior based on this graph? We look at the trend. No, there is no change in behavior. But when we implement 2 things together, rules and ignoring, then what happens? Inappropriate behavior actually increases. So we get the negative result, right? If we just ignore problem behavior and we implement rules, we see an increase in problem behavior. But if we implement rules, ignoring and increasing the praise, we then see a direct correlation with behavior, and that the intervals in which inappropriate behavior occurs decreases. And when we do it again after baseline, we see the same decrease, right? So we have 3 conditions here, and what seems to be the magic combo are the rules, the ignoring, and the praise. And that's really what we're using when we're using a good behavior game, right? We are creating a rule, or rules, could be more than one. Okay, so lining up within 30 seconds is the rule. We are kind of ignoring, right? We're not telling them like, oh no, you didn't line up. We're not reprimanding students for not lining up in time. We're ignoring that the other team moves up, but we are using a ton of praise for positive behaviors and increasing that praise. So I think that this strategy really correlates with the good behavior game, and I call it GBG, good behavior game, because it uses these principles and it amplifies it by giving students a visual, a game to go by. Games are really reinforcing. So I think it takes the strategy and gives students a gamified approach to actually seeing visually their progress. Okay, so we want to, when we create a board game and we implement the good behavior game, we want to define the behavior, and we couldn't call them rules, right? So if we want to define the behavior of using an indoor voice, or keeping our hands and feet to ourselves, or keeping objects out of our mouth, we are defining target behavior, and we are essentially creating a rule. Our learners may or may not have good rule following abilities, but if we are reinforcing the following of those rules and we're reinforcing that target behavior, then by definition, the reinforcement will increase the behavior, right? Even if maybe they're not readers, or maybe they're not following rules yet, we can still shape behavior and use reinforcement to enforce rules. We're using praise because they are getting praise every time they move up on that game board, and ignoring and decreasing reprimands, right? And negative social attention. We have some vicarious learning here too, because we can, if we have learners who can learn through observation and observe one another, they also will see when the other team is winning, or when other students are doing the correct thing. We can also use vicarious reinforcement to try to get all learners on board and behaving in the way that we have defined in the target behavior. So for example, if the target behavior is for 2 learners to stay in their seats during instructional time, and there's a dyad, we can reinforce each individual learner socially or with other reinforcers, tangibles, for sitting in their seats, right? And then if we reinforce student A, student B, if they have observational learning, they can observe that that student got reinforced, and that is how vicarious reinforcement works, so that both students end up responding in a certain way. So we might have some effects of vicarious learning. And we can use this across multiple functions. We can treat attention-seeking behavior. We can treat also task avoidance. We can improve peer interactions. So maybe sharing and greeting one another could be a way to move up on the game board. And we can really be creative with what is the target behavior that we want to shape up and increase. Okay. Here is from the article where that graph just came from, and they defined various forms of inappropriate behavior. So the absence of these behaviors, right? Object, noise, disturbance of others' property, hitting, shoving, pinching, slapping, verbalizations, all of these were defined, and that's what this graph was about, a decrease in all of those inappropriate behaviors. Okay. Very cool article. It's old, but gold. Okay, so we have evidence across settings for rules, praise, and ignoring. And I wanted to bring it up because, like I said, it is something that's applied to when we're using a good behavior game. Tons of research has been done on this. Many students, probably more than 20, I don't remember why I put 20, but you can work across multiple behavior functions, right? On this page, we see a lot of topographies and inappropriate behavior. They determined that these were all disruptive to classroom and either had the function of attention and or avoidance, but we see that rules, praise, and ignoring really worked. And so if we apply that strategy with the game board, we are setting students up for success. I wanted to share this little video with you guys. It's 3.5 minutes. And just to give you a heads up, she's going to be talking about the good behavior game in the most traditional way, which is a whole class, the whole class setting. Okay.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Perrin. I'm a behavior analyst at Brett Denovi and Associates, and I'd like to talk about the good behavior game. In 1969, Barish, Saunders, and Wolf introduced the good behavior game. It's an interdependent group contingency game, and it has several components involved. Some of the components include dividing the class into teams, keeping in mind the behavioral needs of each of the students and also the strengths of the students. Operationally defining the rules and setting those clear expectations. Anytime a rule is broken, the teacher will provide a hatch mark and then provide verbal feedback to the class or team what was broken. The other thing is going to be to establish criterion. So for this, the criterion determines the number of points that the team may not exceed if they want to win. And then the winning team is provided with positive consequences or rewards. Some of these include extra recess time, a homework pass, or lining up first to go to recess or lunch. Some of the research variations have been to address decreasing problem behavior, non-compliance, out-of-seat behavior, and then also to increase some of the adaptive or appropriate behaviors such as sharing. Some concerns expressed by the teachers is that the good behavior game may evoke some negative peer pressure comments from other students. One study that examined negative comments expressed by peers during the good behavior game was Groves and Austin in 2018. This study showed that when the good behavior
I'm just gonna pause it here because I wanted one of the reasons why I chose this article was because I felt like as soon as I said that we're gonna split the class into two, we're gonna split the group into two and have them compete against each other. I think the first thing that we think of as behavior analysts is like, oh, we're going to create negative relations between students, or we're going to create competition, and that might create other problem behavior, right? So that's something that popped up in my mind as well. And so she's going to talk about that. But I just wanted to say that if you thought about it, you're not alone. And let's see what she says regarding this article.
Behavior game was implemented, the researchers did not observe an increase in the frequency of negative comments. Several studies have also demonstrated the long-term positive effects of the good behavior game. In 2008, Kellum and colleagues demonstrated that students exposed to the good behavior game package at a young age, in first or second grade, observed a delay in the onset of cigarette use. There was a significant impact on alcohol and drug abuse and dependency, as well as a decrease in aggressive behavior. In addition, other studies have proved that those students who participated in the good behavior game at an early age were more likely to graduate high school, and there was a reduced need for special education services. Given that the good behavior game is a multi-component intervention, several studies have been conducted to determine which of those components are necessary. However, each of these studies that were conducted were done so only after the participants were exposed to the entire good behavior game package. Foley, Dozier, and Lesser in 2018 conducted a study that controlled for these sequence effects. In addition, they evaluated if the good behavior game was an effective package to decrease disruptive behavior in preschool students during structured instructional times, and they also collected data on both group and individual levels of disruptive behavior. Results indicated that the good behavior game was effective at decreasing disruptive behavior in the preschool students during their structured instructional times. Regarding the component analysis of the Foley study, while some reductions of the disruptive behavior were observed within some of the individual components, the study did say that the package of the good behavior game was most effective at decreasing levels of disruptive behavior below 80% of baseline. What I found most interesting were the implications of the component analysis after the good behavior game was introduced in its entirety. These data suggest that you need to implement the good behavior game to establish certain patterns of behavior. And then once those patterns of behavior are established, they can be maintained with less intensive or less robust interventions. There are some of the
Okay, so like she was saying, we then need to fade out, right? We could use this good behavior game and having a plan to fade it out, and for students to, maybe they still have a game, but they don't need to earn so many points so intensively throughout their day as they start to master and this new response becomes less effortful, right? So, hang on, let's see. I don't know what happened here. We went back. Okay. Great. Here is a graph that shows different phases of the game, and they are the y-axis shows the frequency of talking out, getting out of seat, and other disruptive behaviors. And so we have a frequency of from 0 to 200 on the y-axis, and on the x-axis we have the different conditions and the different sessions or days. So this involved 14 students, and during baseline we see the number of responses going all the way up to 200. The game was implemented, and we see that trend totally decreasing in less than 10. Going back to baseline, we do see an improvement from the initial baseline. So we see some post-treatment effects here, but overall, there's some variability, but it's definitely an increase. We see a total increase after when the game is not being introduced. And then just to test things out and see if rules are effective, rules are not as effective on their own, right? Here we have rules and it looks just like baseline. So not much has changed. Are students really following rules, or are they requiring a reinforcement strategy to follow those rules? Okay. They had a condition where they used SDs and they changed the color of the lights in the room to see if to measure behavior with the rules alone and the board game, and we do see a decrease there. But then when game is the only strategy being used, we see a total decrease in behavior as well. And if I saw this graph, I would say, okay, well, for me, I'm going to use the game and I'm going to try to get that consistently down to 0 or near 0. And this looks like the dotted line, and there's no legend on here, but I want to say the dotted line is team A and the bolded line is team B. So with a group of 14 students, probably 7 versus 7. So you want to set up the target behavior or the objective of the game. How do students win? Right? Typically, it's a rule that will state, hands and feet to yourself, or follow teacher's instructions, ask for help when you need help. Maybe that's a replacement functional communication response that we are looking for instead of meltdown type disruptive behaviors. So in any case, you need to define the target behavior that you're reinforcing. You can target one specific behavior, or like a lot of the articles did, just targeted disruptive behavior, and in the absence of disruptive behavior, right, doing like a DRO, that team can win. Establish clear winning conditions and be contingent. It has to be contingent, and it has to be reliable, that each time the learner engages in expected behavior, that the adult, the therapist, or the teacher is implementing the strategy effectively and not just some of the time. especially when it's being introduced. So we can use this in a home setting, we can use this in a school environment, at a clinic setting, it really depends on who your target is, right? Is it one student? Is it a small group? And is it a whole class? Some target for, if you're looking at an individual, it could be emitting stereotypy when a teacher is talking, right? That's competing with the teacher's, it's very hard to listen to a teacher if you're talking to yourself about Thomas the Train, for example, right? So if we want to decrease self-talk during instruction, we want to also increase attending to the teacher or attending to instruction. So a learner might be more motivated to decrease stereotypy during certain periods of time where the game board is present as an SD for, now I can, these are ways that this is a time that I can win this game. And maybe a reward for that learner, and I've actually done this, that's why I'm bringing it up, is getting 5 to 10 minutes to themselves to talk about any topic they choose, and will engage and talk about Thomas the Train or talk about Minecraft, contingent on winning the game board or winning the behavior game. Okay, so we can define what it is, what behavior we are targeting. It might be more than one, but I just gave you a couple of examples here. If it's a class-wide, we can also choose various behaviors here as well. So it could be transitioning, it could be cleaning up, it could be following instructions on the board when you walk into a classroom, and that the first thing you do is look at the board and follow the instruction that's on the whiteboard when you walk into your classroom in the morning or after a special or after lunch and recess. So every time all the students follow the instruction that's on the board, they win that round, right? So that's another way to implement it in a whole classroom setting. And responding to group instructions. This is a big one for a lot of our learners, that if they're given an instruction one-on-one, they might be more likely to follow that instruction. But if we're giving an instruction to a group, maybe it's 3 students, maybe it's 10 students, that we don't see as much, we don't see the same listener response when it's in a group setting. So maybe that's a goal, and we want the learners to respond to group instructions. So here are just some ideas. You might be coming up with ideas on your own of what you want your learner or learners to do. You will choose then a reinforcer and decide how often they're going to win that reinforcer. So if it's on a fixed interval schedule, you could use a timer, and you could set a timer for 3 minutes. You could set a timer for 10 minutes. You could set a timer for 30 seconds, right? You're going to choose that interval. And when that timer rings, if the learner was engaging in the positive behaviors you defined for that full interval, right, a whole interval, they would move up on the game board. But let's say during that 60-second interval, somewhere along the lines, we see a disruptive behavior. Then you have, let's say you're working with an individual learner, and you see a disruptive behavior occur during that 60-second interval. The timer has not yet rung. We see one maladaptive behavior, then the response would be, oh, it looks like the bad guys are going to move up this time, and the bad guys move up the game board. The learner does not move up. We restart the timer and give them the opportunity to win the next round. So the nice thing about the behavior game, and I didn't mention this before, but the nice thing is that even if they don't win every single interval or every single opportunity when it's one-on-one, they still have a ton of opportunities to error and still win the game at the end. Because even if they don't win this round and the next round, but they win 5 other rounds, they can win the game. So it does allow room for error, and it allows, so it's not that we're looking for 100% positive behaviors. We're not looking for 0 disruptive behaviors to actually get access to the backup reinforcer. But we are motivating learners to decrease maladaptive behaviors, to win faster, to get to the end faster, to reach the reinforcer faster. Because as soon as they win that game, that reinforcer is available. So it could be a toy, it could be a musical instrument, it could be a privilege such as, oh, we're gonna paint our nails or do makeup, whatever it is that your learner's interested in. It might be picking a new train out of the treasure box, and we have mini trains and we're gonna get trains. I keep talking about trains. It might be filling a whole page of stickers. This learner loves stickers. So whatever, right? These are tangible rewards. It could be an activity, a game of your choice. We're going to play pretend play, and whatever scenario you want to play, we're going to do it for 10 minutes. So that's an idea of an activity. It could be just allowing access to talk about any topic you want and just being really engaged with your learner and listening to them, because that's reinforcing, right? And so if you're implementing this good behavior game with one learner and it's you versus the learner, anytime that the learner does not show that target behavior, you are then moving up and you're saying, oh, I'm moving up, or you could say the bad guy moves up this time, let's restart our timer. Doesn't mean that the learner's not going to win the game. It just means that they didn't win that round, right? Another thing to think about is that you might use a timer and you might not. If you're using intervals, interval schedule of reinforcement, you would use a timer. But if you're not, and you're just reinforcing target behaviors such as lining up, or target behaviors such as putting away this toy and transitioning to the next toy, then you don't need timers, right? Depends on what schedule of reinforcement you choose. Group reinforcers for group contingencies could be a class-wide activity. When I did this, so I've done this with individual learners, I've done it with my small classroom. I did extra recess, so we would stay outside for 15 extra minutes. I sometimes did like a bonus snack time, or I might just have free time where they got access to their Chromebooks for some extra time. Whatever it might be, that's reinforcing for your students. And you can also individualize it. So maybe your whole class doesn't get the same reinforcer, but everybody gets a reinforcer, and you can individualize it per student. Okay, so just some ideas so that it's effective. I wanted to just outline that the game board is different than a token board and why it's different. A token board, the learner earns and collects tokens. The learner, if you're not using any punishment procedures and removing tokens, withdrawing tokens, then the learner's always earns the reinforcer in the end. It might take longer, but they still earn that reinforcer. Whereas in the game board, they have the option of losing, and if they error too many times, they don't earn the reinforcer that round, and they would have to wait till the next game. And I do that when I use a game board. As soon as the learner wins or a team wins, I just restart it again. So I'm going to play that game all day long to keep students motivated and on track with the target behavior set outlined. So you don't have to play the game once. You can just keep playing this good behavior game in the same way that you would use a token board over and over again. The token board also does not have a competitive component to the game. So they're just earning tokens, right? I like using both, but the benefit of having the game board and the token board is that you can use this for two different target behaviors, or you can fade out the game board but use a really densely scheduled token board, and you can mix and match. No one's saying that you need to choose one or the other, but that they're different, and they're both intended to reinforce behavior, and they're both based off of the same principles, but that they're different, and you can use them simultaneously as a concurrent schedule of reinforcement. Okay, you're gonna set up your game. I'm going to skip through this because we only have 10 minutes left, and I talked about that already. But as far as data collection goes, you can do this in different ways. You can record the cumulative number of games won for your learner, and you can have a cumulative graph. And so that would start at 0 and progressively just move up. And on a cumulative graph, right, you don't have any decreasing variability. It's always increasing or steady. If no games are won over a course of time, you're going to see a horizontal line. But as soon as a game is won, you're going to see the the trend moving upward, right? So that would be a cumulative graph, cumulative number of games won. You can measure the progress and the speed or the rate of winning based on that graph. You can also record a plus and a minus for each time your learner, especially if you're doing this with an individual learner, you might record a plus for each time that the learner moves up and a minus each time the learner does not move up for that interval or for that opportunity. And then you would have either a frequency or a percentage graph for your individual, right? You might then also plan to systematically thin out the reinforcement schedule. If you're using a timer and an interval schedule, you would then systematically increase the intervals so that learners are engaging in that target behavior and getting access to the reinforcer and the backup reinforcer after more time. And you're also going to define success. So if the criteria is 2 consecutive wins to increase the demand or the effort level, right? Then that's something I've done. Like, so 2 consecutive wins equals I'm going to require an additional target behavior, or I'm going to require a longer duration of on-task behavior or appropriate behavior. So hopefully that's clear, but I wanted to just share with you that you can take data on how effective this game is in many different ways. You might just take data on just like in the articles, they just had the rate or the frequency of maladaptive behavior or the percentage of intervals with maladaptive behavior, and we hope to see a decreasing trend. You can once you've utilized this strategy and the learners and the game board has been conditioned as a reinforcer, you can then transfer it and do some parent training and show parents how they can implement this with their kids on the weekends or after school. I wanted to go over the pros. Like I said, it allows for you to use various contingencies and concurrent reinforcement systems, like using a point system and a good behavior game, or a point system, a token board together. You are also increasing the establishing operation for target behaviors and giving students a visual and gamifying it. You are also utilizing essentially a DRO, right? Or a DRA, but giving them that visual that they are also actively participating in this DRO. So it's not just a reinforcer with social praise or a tangible, but that they are working on thinning out their schedule of reinforcement with this game board. Okay, then we have you have the ability to then create this game board as a self-management or self-monitoring type of strategy where students monitor their own behavior and move themselves up and down. I've done this with clipboards and timers and had individual students track their own progress with their game board. And just all the empirical evidence shows decreased rates of aggression, disruptive behavior, substance abuse, that, like they said in the video, increased academic persistence and participation, and the list goes on. The only cons I could think about is that it might take some time and resources to put this together, might have to train therapists or parents, and that could be just a challenge that comes along with it. If you don't plan if you don't plan correctly and the student's not meeting reinforcement and not winning the game, it's not getting implemented correctly and our goals are not aligned with where the student is at. So we need to always utilize shaping and ensure that the student has a chance to win. So if they're constantly losing or one team's always losing, we definitely need to make adaptations and ensure that both teams have opportunities to win and that the learner usually has to win at least the first game so that this board game gets conditioned as a reinforcer and not have that it doesn't signal as an abolishing operation for them. So choose appropriate rules, choose appropriate targets for your learner. Like I said, my class was taking over 5 minutes at the beginning of the school year. If I set the initial target to 30 seconds, my class wouldn't win. And then they wouldn't care about the board game because it wouldn't get conditioned. It would be a signal, it would be like an S delta, right? Just signal nothing to them. And we need to make sure that we use it so that students show success and that we shape up behavior. So that's that. This was if there was extra time, but I think we're right on schedule. Talked about this. I'm going to open it up for questions.
So we did have a few questions come in. The first
Cool.
one, how do you work through negative responses to losing the game? Would you not want to implement this with children who have difficulty with winning or losing or competition?
Good question. For these learners, I would say that they definitely need to win the first couple of games, set them up for success so that they see that they are successful, that this game works in their favor. And usually, so what happens is, and I had this question for my mentors when I first implemented this, and my mentor said, usually a learner, especially if you're using this one-on-one, your learner will lose once at some point, but the experience of losing is so aversive that they will do everything to not lose again. So yes, we might get a negative response, but typically they will, especially, and this really correlates to like that one-on-one, like teacher versus student, there after that experience, it's so aversive that winning becomes more important. And we can just say like, yeah, I know. You can validate their feelings. Oh, I know how you feel. Winning, that's not a great feeling. I know. Well, hopefully you can win next time. I really hope you do. And you can encourage them for the next game. We're going to start another game right after, right? And so they have so many opportunities to win. You could decrease the effort level for the next game just to ensure that they win the next round, and then maybe slowly fade out the intervals or the expectations so that they have more likelihood of winning. But that's a really good question. I personally haven't had any kids having meltdowns from losing, but definitely some negative feelings. And yeah, when I use it one-on-one, typically kids will do everything in their power not to lose ever again. And losing should happen far less than winning. So yeah. Oh wait, you're on mute.
Oh no. Okay. Sorry. Next question is, when a student or class wins the game and they earn a reinforcer, what happens if the teacher or staff member wins?
Great question. So I did this because I did not want to, it was my personal choice to not put kids against kids, and I had a very small class size. I put kids against me and against the paras. So if I won, I think I won once. I would get the iPad for I don't know, a minute, and I would watch the iPad and show lots of enthusiasm for winning. I love winning. I got the iPad, and I would watch the iPad, and nobody else would get the iPad. So observational learning, like, I hope you guys win next time. iPad was really cool today. And kind of show them the effects of winning. You guys have to win. The iPad is so great, and kind of show them how fun it is to win. So that was the response that I had. When you split up a group into two, then one group gets the reinforcer and the other group doesn't. So you can, and like I said, yeah, we have fears of that. And there's so many articles that show that there are no real negative consequences of one group winning and the other group not winning. But if you notice that only one group of student always wins, and that other group never wins because there's one learner who always kind of screws it up for the rest of the group, you could then utilize a hero contingency where if that learner does something well, that he wins for the whole team. So maybe there's an additional contingency just set up for that learner so that every time he does something positive, his whole team wins because of him. And you want to set it up so that both teams both have equal opportunities to win. So you might have to tweak it a bit so that access to reinforcement occurs for all students.
Definitely makes sense. All right, I think we have time for one more question. So could you explain a bit more with an example of how BTs can use this with one client at home?
Yeah, good. I love sharing this with BTs. I have so many learners throughout my experience, and I've had so many clients who have a hard time losing at games, right? So they're playing Sorry or they're playing Uno, and they had to draw two, or they had to move back to home, and that was the end of the world, and they'd roll on the floor and rip up the game or throw it across the room or whatever. And so we see all these disruptive behaviors, and I'm applying it to playing games. So what I told the BT is say, hey, let's work on good sportsmanship as our target behavior. So yes, you're playing Uno, you're playing Sorry, but at the same time, there's another way to win. And that way is showing good sportsmanship and tolerating losing a round or not moving up on the game, or having to draw 2, draw 4, or whatever it might be. So every time they tolerate or use a positive statement like, oh man, right? We might use functional communication training and say, hey, if you say, oh man, or oh, maybe next time, or good game, tolerating losing with functional communication training, they can move up on this other board game and win this other game. So they have an alternate game that they're winning at. And you can say, hey, you won, and you won. Like, now what do you want to do? You get to choose a special treat, or we can do a game of your choice, or we get to do, get to go outside to go to the park, whatever the reinforcer is. But we take the stress or the pressure and the EO to win this game of Uno to like, hey, I have another game that I also want to win, and I have to engage in these functional communication responses to win that game. And it kind of diffuses all of the attention, and the EO to engage in functional communication responding is now higher, and we have a competing reinforcer. Like, am I going to engage in disruptive behavior during Uno, or am I going to show all my functional communication responses and win at this game and get this better reinforcer? So that seems to work really well with our BTs, and I explain it to them and I give them the game. They feel like, oh, thanks for that strategy. Like, it's helpful for them. So that's just a way that I've used it with BTs.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. Okay, so it does look like we are at time. I just wanted to say thank you so much for today's presentation. Thank you everyone for joining us. If you have any additional questions, go ahead and send them to the email that was posted in the chat, and I would be happy to send them on to Kristin for her response and her expertise. But thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope everybody got something out of it, and I look forward to your questions, and I'll try to respond to as many as I can.
Thank you, Kristin.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.